What's up, man? How's it going?
Pretty good, dude. What's going on?
Nothing much with me, nothing much with me. So, do you want to just have a. What do you want this debate particularly to be about? I'm thinking it could either be economics or just general political philosophy.
Yeah, that's cool. It can be, just a kind of open, free, free range thing where we just go through stuff. I don't know if you had anything in particular that you wanted to discuss.
Well, let me just ask first, what's your political leanings? I know you were trying to convince Sargon of minarchism, but are you anarcho-capitalist,
Yeah, philosophically,
philosophically but not practically?
practically libertarian, philosophically anarcho-capitalist.
All right, so I mean, I guess we could get into the economic side of it because a presupposition of anarcho capitalism is that not anarchism, capitalism is a worthwhile system to replace the current system, statism, however you want to call it, with.
Uh huh.
Have you ever read the book Debunking Economics by, I believe his name is Mike Sheen or Mike Veen, something like that?
I don't think so.
Um, and I can just come out and just say it right now. I know exactly where all the libertarians and classical liberals, however they want to call themselves, are coming from. I used to be in that area, and this book was one of the great things. It goes through mathematically about how some of the basic assumptions of analyzing capitalism is false. Let me just check the author's name really quick, just so I can get it right.
I think I see it. Steve King.
Yeah, Steve Keen, that's it. Um, I basically recommend this book because it makes the distinction between capitalism and economics in general as opposed to neoliberalist economics in general. And he just if you're not big into economics, then you won't really know what he's talking about. But it basically debunks certain things like people's um, the law of transitivity, completeness, etc., that make up the law of demand, and he basically shows, as an economist, how the demand curve doesn't always have to slope down, supply curve doesn't have to go up, how calculating aggregate demand is false and such like that. And based on those various premises, I still hold I still hold the belief that domestic capitalism is correct for especially America, due to our ability to be self sufficient and that in general people's cultural leniency towards individualist economics. But in terms of supporting an anarcho capitalist stance on international trade, I think that the assumptions made by, most people who you know who I'm talking about, right? The people that use capitalism as an excuse to promote free international trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate grounds in order to just dismiss that argument and advocate for a form of protectionism.
Hmm.
Now,
Okay.
what do you have to say to that general idea of protectionism and such?
Well, it depends. It depends on where your argument follows from it. If it's, I'm assuming, just based off what your reference just then, you're referring to, I guess, um, some form of where you can, to where supply and demand, like to where we would either either would negatively or positively affect our supply or our demand for certain products outside of our currency, or I mean, not outside of our currency, but outside of our um, economy in terms of foreign economies and things like that, and
Well,
foreign trade. So,
the
eh,
basic idea is it goes off of the model in international economics called the factor specifics model, which adds a new term of mobility that some people in international trade benefit more than others, and others can actually lose benefits, such as people with very mobile products, and products such as maybe airplanes or software, anything like that, are very mobile and gain a lot of benefit from international trade, while people that have own or produce very non-mobile things such as let me think of an example that they give. Actual real champagne, as in the wine that's only made in the region of Champagne, France. The grapes that are grown there and and their actual production of wine, it's not mobile. You can't make it anywhere else, or else it's technically not champagne as it's called. So if France were to open up an international trade, and if other wine producers were allowed to free trade within the country, those people who had invested, or not even invested, but are dependent on the economy of Champagne and Champagne, France, would just overall lose from that international trade.
because they wouldn't be the only sole producers of the champagne anymore.
Not 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 because of just competition, but that because they're very kind of stock, or their input into that industry isn't very mobile. They're not. Let, let me put it like this. So the champagne producers are currently producing for France out of Champagne, France, and everything like that. And a new trade deal opens up, and different wines are brought in as a competition to that through international trade. Now, very large people that have stock in, say, general alcohol brewing, like Bud Light and everything like that, they're of course a competition. It's a substitute for the champagne wine. The winemakers of Champagne, France, can't easily switch over to a different kind of economy, producing a more competitive, just general alcoholic product, because their entire, you know, production is towards the champagne specifically produced there.
Okay, so but how does that I get that they don't have the capabilities to properly compete with other champagne or other alcoholic beverages, but how would them I guess you're not only talking about prohibiting imports but also prohibiting export of the champagne too, right?
Well, protectionism, it's not really against exports. Usually, protectionism is just classed as a general tariff, such as you calculate a tax on the import of goods in order to make it equivalent to the domestic goods, such as if China can make a $500 car or whatever, and they import to the U.S., and the U.S. The lowest they can produce a car, making their overhead zero, is say $600, then a tariff would be put in place so that the Chinese car to the consumer in the end would be also worth $600. So it becomes just a matter of choice like that. That's the general idea whenever people propose protectionism, is a tariff on imports, not necessarily exports. But getting into international politics, usually the other countries will also put tariffs on your economy in turn.
Okay, and you're making the argument that's a good thing because it preserves employment.
Yeah, it not only preserves employment, but it also it the word preserves isn't exactly right, but it maintains the value of people who have already made investments within the domestic economy. It's not easy for people who have, invested, into a small business or any kind of non-international business, to quickly convert over to compete in the global in the global scale. It just isn't easily done. Their means of production aren't mobile, as the factor specific model dictates.
Hmm. But should it necessarily be? Should it be easier for them to do so?
Well, you can't really argue if it should or shouldn't be easier, just the nature of the goods. Land is a particularly immobile resource for means of production. You can't easily take what property you have and easily Crap, I'm trying to remember the specifics they bring up with land in the factor specific model. It's not easy to turn a land dedicated towards farming and such into directly into like manufacturing. Like they bring up, you need to bring in various various contractors and other various things in order to reappropriate the land to be even just competitive with these other already appropriate factors of production elsewhere.
Yeah, and but through that, I don't really see the necessary problem. I mean, for any for any different competitor to start up, whether you're transforming your farmland, which is no longer in demand, into manufacturing property, you of course you need some type of investment and some type of outsource materials, labor, contractor, specialist, whatever, to actually get that up and running.
Yeah, but
But
the problem with that is within the very capitalist system of a private business. If the person in a not necessarily protected but non-international market is already producing at his marginal cost is equal to his marginal revenue, the second that a large international corporation comes in and starts competing for a much lower price, he's already spending all of his marginal revenue for the marginal cost of his product. He doesn't have any extra investment to actually build up and try to compete with this international organization.
well, that assumes there's an international organization that's going to come up and compete.
Well, I mean, we already have in the modern day world. We have various things, and even under the anarcho-capitalists would consider institutions such as the International Monetary Fund as a state legitimized um, a state legitimized company, since they do indeed make a profit off of their loans.
Hmm.
And so, if all of us, if us as a world decided to agree not to engage in government practices anymore and everything like that, the International Monetary Fund, all of their investments and all of their contracts would still hold valid. No person on Earth outside of maybe another huge oligarch with similar capabilities could make a competitor to the International Monetary Fund.
Well, yeah, there are certain industries such as currency and loans, things like that, which are very very limited and may almost create a quasi monopoly because either there's no demand for a competitor or be having a competitor is just not realistic in terms of capabilities of others. But I don't really see that as necessarily a bad thing. I don't know what would be the downside of that.
Of the International Monetary Fund being a natural monopoly?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can already see a lot of the problems that George Soros is causing, and I mean, strictly from an anarcho capitalist perspective, the International Monetary Fund and George Soros, as its head, are indeed funding statist organizations such as various governments and everything like that. So, a corporation itself that's a natural monopoly is using its revenue in order to prop up, you know, government forces and institutions.
Yeah, but what would be the what would be the antithesis to that? Like how would you prevent that through either protectionism or any other means?
Well, protectionism, you can basically say, "Sorry, we don't want to deal with your organization and everything like that," and you can say as a as a representative body to say, "Sorry, you cause a lot more trouble than you're worth. We're not going to engage with any kind of business with you. We don't care how much money you're offering." And you make it a, litigated principle not to associate with them, no matter the kinds of proposed opportunity they may bring.
Yeah, but can't that be an individual market choice or or collective voluntary market choice rather than something? that's institutional or through like I guess nationalist perspective?
But the problem with that is no individuals are actually lending are actually getting money from the International Monetary Fund. It's all entirely institutions and organizations and things like that. I mean, Soros takes his profit and funds the what are they called? They're not called they're not called anti-fem or whatever the Femen or whatever that's called. That group they also have been
Oh,
shown.
Femin, yeah.
Yeah, Femin. They also he also is shown to funnel money into anti-fash and Black Lives Matter and various other kind of groups that just cause general unrest within the area. So he never funnels money directly into a person. It's always through various institutions, even if they are separate from the government, such as the Clinton Foundation, and various other foundations made by politicians, to act as slush funds.
So your argument would be to kind of cut off that revenue stream for a collective area to where you're basically in a sense getting rid of Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and Femin by saying that you can't receive funding from your source in our particular nation or whatever.
Well, yeah, it wouldn't be directed at them. It would just say that if you're well, it would basically have to go to a kind of individualist thing here, I suppose, in this thing to say if you're the owner of an organization or a business or anything, you cannot receive money from these sources. And I mean, even as a even as an anarcho-capitalist, they would just kind of shift this to the idea of social acceptable norms, and they would say, all right, if Gary's flower shop is receiving $500 million from ISIS every single year, we don't want to have anything to do with him. All this is saying is, all right, we as a community have signed into law that Gary's flower shop is no longer going to receive any of, you know, ISIS's funding, and none of ISIS's money can enter our territorial bounds, or in this case, the idea, kind of like the idea space jurisdiction of where these organizations lie.
Hmm. Okay. So, but that would be based on the would that be based on any particular principle that ISIS is violating or any particular reason? I'm sure with ISIS a reason, but could that logic also be translated into organizations that people may just not like? Like just let's just say if Europe just happens to be just doing better than America, or some European wine
Hmm.
company is just doing better than American wine companies, and the European company decides they want to invest in an American one, and the rest of the collective just say, yeah, no, we don't really want your funds coming into our community.
That is true, but it's also true with the anarcho-capitalist perspective too. All that would be done, instead of having an institutionalized, set in stone ground rule for the prevention of that investment within the country, all that would be done would be have kind of an informal, almost semi-cultural pressure on the particular person they're trying to either buy from to get the property to invest, or the general, maybe firm they're trying to buy up. Just kind of a general leaning culturally in an anarcho-capitalist society that says, if you take this money, we can't stop you, but bad things are probably going to happen to you economically for it.
Yeah, isn't that preferable than a outright blockade?
Not necessarily, because people, and this is another point that it goes over in the debunking economics, is a fundamental assumption is complete information of the best way for a business and the consumer to trade and barter is through third degree price discrimination, knowing exactly he where the most the buyer is willing to buy for and the least the seller is willing to sell for are, met in equilibrium. But the problem is we don't have complete information. The particular person, let's just say for simplicity, it's a firm that the Europe is trying to buy out the ownership and make a new market in America. It becomes a kind of guessing game. Well, people might not like what Europe is doing, but there might be people that don't care or anything like that. Then it becomes a game of probability and guessing games, and it it eventually just kind of spirals down into an unspoken what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of suppression of the permissibles and the impermissibles economically within the society compared to an objective standard that one can point to saying, all right, you broke this law, you're going to get this punishment, compared to, well, you didn't take the investment and buyout, but the investment seems to be doing some other stuff through another third party that's a bit iffy, so we might cut back, and it just gets into a big, huge mess through that way.
And the means by which you would have this legislation or whatever process to where you can objectively determine if someone's revenue stream is harmful or not would be through the state, correct?
Well, yeah, it'd be enforced through the objective institutions of the state.
Okay. Wouldn't that so that'd be more so a defense of the system we have currently?
No, not really, because right now the current, well, I'm gonna say the state of the current state is to try to engage in these various free trade practices, even though the other economies don't engage with free trade with us, but they're very for the opening of the domestic economy to international economies because of these very practices of immobile and mobile factors of production and such like that, because labor is one cheap labor specifically is one of the mobile factors of production, and skilled labor, the more skilled you get, the more immobile it becomes for various reasons described in the model. But there's one thing that the foreign world just you can just classify everyone as not the domestic nation has, and that is cheap labor that's willing to work for less than the necessary consumer price index of that domestic nation.
Hmm. Do you know any examples of outside of America, any other nation that engages in protectionism to preserve its
Well,
to preserve
yes,
its immoral?
actually, there are quite a few countries that engage in protectionism. Of course, as you said, we had America the beginning of its during the beginning of its reign. We also have let me think. I'm pretty sure there are some terrorists. I'm trying to think of specific examples in. Oh, that's one very good one. Up in Canada, what they have is they have a form of protectionism where when they're doing I don't know if it's for movies or not, but I know for a fact for cartoon shows that are made in Canada, they have a form of protectionism that says the cartoon characters can only be voiced by Canadian citizens, and by doing this, they protect their domestic voice actors and such and such. Ah, what am I trying to say? And so their domestic voice actors and keep the economy of voice acting, to a certain level within their own nation.
Okay, so if you're going to enact Texas policy to protect your voice actors,
Mm-hmm.
you're well one you're well not essentially, but possibly limiting the productivity that could be made in the field of animation or cartooning, because now you're limited to this particular set of voice actors, which may or may not be plentiful. And I don't know if you approach this or Canada currently has this, if it becomes, too scarce for voice acting, if they allow certain factors to permit outsourcing or importing of other skill set or other people contributing to voice acting, or is it always just set as if you can't find a voice actor here, then you just can't do your animation?
Well, then wouldn't that just go under the basic premise of capitalism? And since there is a demand in that domestic economy for voice actors, the supply of voice actors will also go up as well.
Not necessarily, because I mean, if voice acting is strict to that economy, you can't hire voice actors outside of that. That gives voice actors possibly a comparative advantage to to raise their cost of labor, and that also limits the amount of or limits who can afford voice actors for their particular animation. Like you said, in regards to the wine industry or any other small business startup, to where you can't really afford these expensive investment costs, to start up your business, with all the other preceding factors. You also can't just, assume that you can afford, spending $500 an episode on a voice actor rather than outsourcing it to a, Chinese person or a American person who could be offering it for, I don't know, $200 per episode.
Hmm.
So it also kind of monopolizes the realm of voice acting and benefits whatever very established high income, corporate animation firms that would be out there.
Yeah, that's true. But again, that's just a basic problem within the individualist capital system. All that is just the formation of a union of voice actors, which in economics is equivalent to the practice of a cartel model, and the cartel model always requires a use of force in order to enforce that specific thing, or else you'll get what's called in slang scabs. You'll always have people that break away from this union of similar similar firms in order to try to capitalize on the extra demand and the lacking of supply.
Okay, but you'll be arguing in favor of that though. To like even though it may be a possibility, you're arguing in favor of making it institutional, correct?
Institutional of what?
Of pretty much the cartel model to just solidify the union rather than have it to where it's a possible occurrence rather than a guaranteed occurrence through the state or whatever other force mechanism that you would have in place.
No, no, not internationally, but I mean within a domestic economy, unions are a prevalent thing, and scabs are also a prevalent thing, and it doesn't need to be institutionalized and formalized. To my knowledge, I think only major cities have institutionalized specific union laws outside of basic things. I think most states do have basic union laws, but only when they get into the actual structure of institutions. I think only places like New York, Cincinnati, Atlanta, pretty much any of the big manufacturing places actually have very specific institutional laws for unions.
Hmm. So, to what extent would you propose that we enact protectionism? I'm sure because if we're going to go down the road, it's not going to solely be one particular economy doing it. It's probably going to end up being an international occurrence where all sorts of competing economies have their various protectionist policies.
Of course, and this is going into my personal opinion here, but I think the optimal protectionist policy would look like this: all imported products, etc., etc., would have a tariff to make them equivalent to the prices of domestic things, such as if you're importing bananas from Chile, you would have a percentage tax of tariff, so that the price of a Chilean banana is equivalent to an American banana next to each other on the store. And the only exception I would make to this is particular particular goods and commodities that are incredibly specific that can't be manufactured within the nation itself. And I'm not talking in a very general thing. I'm talking like specific things such as paintings from a particular artist. He lives outside the country, and of course, you won't have a domestically produced version of that artist painting within the country. Or, for the example I gave earlier, the champagne wine. You can't have any wine that's technically champagne unless it's made in Champagne, France. That would be another thing that would be above various tariff laws. But for general interchangeable goods such as hoses, car tires, you know, microchips, etc., those I think should be made to actually be competitive with the domestic economies so that it becomes a matter of taste and preferences that dictate whether people in that domestic economy buy things internationally or domestically.
So, but who does that benefit? You know, it sounds like you're trying to pretty much kind of like remove the profit model from I guess all trade or commerce, pretty much.
Well, yeah, well, it's not necessarily removing profit, it's just making it so that the domestic economies in the book it dismisses the idea of aggregate marginal revenue, but just assuming for a second that aggregate marginal revenue is a thing for the domestic economy, it's making them on par with the foreign with the foreign economies doing the same thing because it just and I know that your retort is going to be that's a problem with the institution itself doing things like minimum wage, etc. But even if those institutional things were abolished, such as minimum wage and everything like that, the general, as they call it, living wage, which I'm against the idea of living wage, but it's better termed the consumer price index of, how much it costs people to just, basically live, buy food, pay the minimum rent, etc., etc. That is different between the two economies. And when the other economy, the foreign economy, even if they're selling at a lower price than the domestic economy, their their standard of living and thus their CP excuse me, hold on. Sorry, I had to cough there.
No
Their
problem.
their CPI is much lower due to their lower standard of living, and thus they can sell at a lower price while still maintaining that standard of living. If we wanted to compete with that, we would have to lower our standard of living too. I mean, if you're looking at the very idea of sweatshop labor, that's basically forced slavery, and I don't know if it's an anarcho-capitalist nightmare, but it's definitely the a progressivist nightmare of capitalism where they had the Hershey towns or whatever, where Hershey basically owned all the property within that town and all the money that people got from their paycheck was paid back into their company for the land that Hershey owned. Hershey owned the grocery store, etc., etc., and such like that. So the problem would be with competing a domestic economy with the foreign economy is either the CPI and the standard of living would have to go down and be competitive, which no one wants to do. No one wants to say, "All right, your child will will be limited to maybe getting a book for Christmas instead of any electronics in order to compete." It just is out of the question for anyone who values their domestic economy more than just the world at large.
But we've had a pretty competitive economy thus far, especially in terms of things like technology and technological innovations, and our standard of living and our not only our standard of living overall, but also our um, our means of consumption in terms of what we get for our buck has consistently, almost pretty rapidly increase rather than decrease. Like with China, being with Chinese labor increasing in terms of electronic productivity and things like that, by far outpacing America. China, Korea, Japan are pretty much leaders in consumer tech, and our we're not necessarily competing in terms of we're trying to make better, cheaper tech products than China. We realize that that's a proper niche that they fill. That's a market that they serve better than us, and we're benefiting from that by having cheaper imports of these consumer electronics than we would have if we produced them. And they're also receiving benefit by receiving our more percentage of our GDP rather than if we just maintain it in us. So it's kind of like a two-way. We're both benefiting. I don't see why we would have to necessarily um, decrease our standard of living if we wanted to compete with like Samsung or any other outsourced corporation.
Well, that again goes back to the factor specific model, and whenever you take an average of things such as income and everything like that, the problem arises that it's the people with the very mobile means of production and general mobile investments. They're the ones that are getting a majority of this benefit from the international trade. The person there, which before could have made made however much they need through a domestic economy, are now pushed out. And yes, it's true that the standard of living on average has gone up. This is due to, as they say, the top 1% getting ever more increasing amounts of wealth. The the reason that if we want to compete, we would have to lower our CPI is because it's just kind of a general feedback loop. The people work for a lower CPI because, or they have a lower CPI just because the standard of living is so low, and they work because they have to. All other choices, they aren't big on individual innovators because China has they actually have a very protectionist economy, and they have a lot of remnants from the Mao Zedong based economy. And because of that, they're almost working for near slave labor. Like I don't remember the name of it, but there's quite a few great documentaries about the living conditions within Hong Kong. I mean, it's it's absolutely one of the best places to live in China, in just as a general assessment, but that the people that live there, their apartments are our apartments are, maybe like one bedroom, one bath, living room, small kitchen, and maybe maybe an extra guest bedroom. I mean, the Chinese Hong Kong apartments. I mean, they're pretty much equivalent to I forget what they're called, but you've undoubtedly seen those pictures of what are they called? The kind of Japanese hotels that are almost like pods that you saw in the six, not the Sixth Sense, the Sixth Element. Those
Yeah,
kind of hotel pods that are only like that big, and these are just general living conditions
kind of like New
off of
York.
that. Yeah, but I mean, even even out in the country, there aren't major like stately manors or landowners or everything. Out in the country of China, it's much poorer, and in general, their houses usually consist of maybe shacks about maybe half the size of one of our suburban homes, and in general, the standard of living, in order to compete with that kind of standard of living producing that CPI, would just be absolutely unacceptable to almost every single American. I mean, the only people I could think of that would, not be affected much are the people living in the Appalachia who are, among the poorest in America. But if you tried to not institutionally, but just through a general process of competition and investment, people would notice within maybe a decade or a decade or two that they've had to scale down in their houses just to afford a lot, and you'd have a revolution overthrowing that right then.
Hmm. So what I'm getting is that I guess, there would need to be for this model to play out. There would need to be some sort of baseline level of overall wealth for society at large, to where no one's getting too wealthy, to where the competitor is so low that you can't, you have to lower your standards because they come up. But then again, if they become wealthy enough, then you also have to, I guess, would you then reap the benefits if their level of wealth go up? If like if China tomorrow, like if their standard of living increase as they grow in numbers and GDP and everything like that, wouldn't then we start seeing more benefit in terms of us now being the underdogs, and having cheaper labor or whatever whatnot, being the less wealthy country?
In a sense, yes, but I don't. I mean, I can't really think of any kind of economic policy that China could do to forcibly increase the standard of living of all the people, because a product standard living is a product of just some basic what are the word I'm looking for, traits that are necessary to be productive in economy. It's not just merely um, loyalty or self-interest. You need productivity. I mentioned is one. You need innovation, etc., etc. And the Chinese people, I mean, pretty much. I mean, this goes back into Chinese history, but I mean, all their philosophy has been pretty much hammering home to collectivize and to form with the collective. Everything from Confucianism and Lao Tzu, and then after that, even the rejection of that with the Maoist revolution, destroying as much as previous Chinese culture as possible, still enforced this idea of collectivism and becoming widgets in the machine. You've heard the humorous story, right, about Mao ordering all of the people to melt down their farming tools in order to begin a an iron exporting business, and all they were left with was a nation full of worthless pig iron.
Yeah.
And I mean, they didn't have a rebellion over that, so no one had the foresight economically to say, hey, melting down all of our farming tools isn't a good economic thing. And if they did during, I can't remember specifics or numbers, but I remember there was a campaign during Mao's reign where he got various economists economists together and basically said, "Give me all your suggestions for improving the economy." And they, of course, gave very capitalist things, and he, of course, had them all executed for traitors against the state. So I
Yeah.
don't really see how they could possibly raise the standard of living of every single member in China when every single person within China doesn't really have the capability of supporting or naturally investing into that system.
Well, I think that would be a consequence of like collective authority, or central authority rather, um, deciding which economic um, pathway is best suited to increase standard of living for people.
But even if there was no institutional thing, if the Chinese government said, all right, we're going to try to back off as much as possible and let economics take their course with the basic, just, political and economic background of China, most Chinese citizens would not even rise to the occasion to be much better off than they were then, and the ones that would be better off would be possibly Hong Kong businessmen, but even then they're less accustomed to innovation and more accustomed to management and sales.
Okay, but that would then be their specialized service, for that region.
Not not um maybe, but again, this is kind of a inherent flaw with the capitalist system. I have a great video, and maybe I'll post it after during this debate, where basically the problem in corporations is when you have a monopoly oligarchy or any kind of thing that's not perfect competition, when you have any kind of company that has a measurable size of the of the consumer base as either brand loyal customers or just general through random selection, making a better product doesn't um doesn't what's the word I'm looking for, doesn't affect elasticity as much as advertising does. So whenever these corporations and he uses the specific example of the tech industry. I forget which one it was. It was specific tech industry, but he makes the comparison of Coke versus this particular tech corporation. With Coke, they don't really change the product, the formula of Coke. Whenever they do, it's some big, huge thing like new Coke or anything like that. But with tech, if you make a printer that's 2% more efficient in printing, the corporation doesn't really get anything out of that. What they get more out of is instead people who create more effective agent advertising agencies within this monopoly or oligopoly model. So they're the people that get promoted. They're the people that make more business decisions, and that's just a basic problem with with corporate structure is that in these economies where previously they have been, monopolies or oligopolies, advertising becomes the dominant say in market share rather than actual product uniqueness to say uniqueness or just usability.
I don't know. I mean, advertising is definitely a important factor, but for example, if someone created a alternative printer that prints 2% faster than its competitor, and if they didn't have the means of advertising, of course they would um, not be able to properly compete because nobody would essentially know about their product. But there's also comes the point to where it's not just if when people go out in search of a competitor, like if I'm printing slow and if I'm just like, okay, I really like a faster printer, and sometimes the consumer doesn't necessarily rely on receiving the advertising. They go out in search of competition, and that may lead them to find this competitor and provide them with sales, which then translates into them having more money to invest in marketing and advertising to attract more sales, which then kind of gets them closer to level off with the playing field of this other huge advertiser for this inferior printer.
Of course, but that's an informed consumer. The majority of all consumers are uninformed. They usually base their decisions off of very simple things like um like brand loyalty, convenience in terms of what do I know will be there, where do I know they'll have stock, I know that it's at this part of the store, etc. Very few people, like for example, this is kind of a personal experience for me, but do you know those peanut butter Girl Scout cookies, the ones that are chocolate coated?
I think so, yeah.
They're called tagalongs, and they're my favorite kind of Girl Scout cookie. And I was, they have very high prices, and tired of getting those Girl Scout cookies, and I, researched and looked up online, and there's a specific other kind of cookie that's made by Keebler that are pretty much the exact same thing. I can't remember what they're called, but in order to try to find those, I had to search through various go well first I had I went to various stores like Target, Walmart, etc., bakeries, etc., to see if they had that brand, but they didn't. Then I just needed to check to see if they actually stocked that brand in the first place, and see that no, these local stores and such don't stock that brand, etc., etc. And all that just for a substitute for a slightly lower price, and the end conclusion was just, even though they're cheaper for the exact same product, if I want this product, I'm gonna have to buy the more expensive product because just I know that I can get them reliably and I know that they'll be in stock reliably. So the very act of them having a lower it's a lower supply, and also it's another economic term like it's basically a synonym for availability to the consumer at their leisure. Because of their lack of availability, now this other more, and I think that Girl Scout cookies are pretty much an iconic thing to almost become kind of an oligopoly within the cookie business. I mean, you have, I think,
Yeah,
I
like on par with Oreos.
yeah, I know. I think I know there's specific brands, but I'm trying to think. I think maybe there's nine as high up as you can go owners of various cookie things. I think Kellogg owns does Kellogg own the Girl Scout things? I can't remember, but I think Kellogg owns one of the big shares, and they're like the top nine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
But that would be a decision that you would factor as a consumer. I mean, I don't see. I mean, granted, it probably sucks for this other cookie company who can't afford, whether it be shelf space at the local grocery store, or advertising and online, or in terms of proper shipping to get products to you overnight, or things like that. Um,
indeed, the point is it becomes a self-feeding loop. The more people see that particular brand and are more associated with that particular brand, the more they demand it from stores. The more stores have to increase their stocking of that particular brand, and the least space they have for the non-well advertised brands. So even though the products are the same, the advertising is the primary factor in determining both the supply and thus the demand and thus the price.
but you're saying that's negative.
Yeah, I'm saying that's a negative by making a competitive product within a system that has been and is currently in not a monarchy, a monopoly or oligopoly. It creates a case where there's high barrier to entries. You would need to match their advertising, or at least get it to a point where people know your brand kind of semi decently, so you can start to get that point of advertising. But anyone who's making a competitive product with these particular high brands just can't get to that point because it's a multi-billion-dollar advertising thing. I mean, with all the sodas on the regular soda fountain thing, I mean, you have usually nine. With the idea of how easy it is to make soda, and how low cost it is to actually get a recipe, etc., and actually make soda. In order to enter that market, it's nearly impossible because you would just need almost hundreds of billions of dollars of just investment and startup money just to advertise to get the brand associated with people that it is a good enough substitute.
But doesn't that mean there's not really a demand for alternatives if people are satisfied with with purchasing what's available?
Well, no, it's a demand if you're going by the one of the assumptions of microeconomics. It's that in two competing substitutes are just that they have to be substitutes of each other. I can't remember the specific thing. There's probably a specific term of permissibility of it kind of like the opposite of transitivity, saying I'm willing to have a Coke instead of a Pepsi or something like that. But even so, if something is a direct substitute, such as my personal example with the tagalong cookies and the Keebler off-brand, which is the exact same thing, just a different brand, then they should have the same or at least virtually similar demand curves.
Um, well, not necessarily because they're not equal products. They don't have equal capabilities in terms of their stock. They don't have equal capabilities in terms of their marketing. So they may offer the same thing, but the one producer of it has an advantage, and that's what leads that producer to become successful.
Well, it's not that what leads it to become successful, it just becomes a self fulfilling feedback loop of their success breeds more success, etc., etc. And innovation can't really intercede in the market because that innovation at best can only match what is already there as a substitute.
Well, I mean, if innovation can only match what's currently there, then it's not really innovation.
Exactly, but I'm using innovation as kind of a term to like in I guess inspiration might be the right word for a company to create a competition for that product of trying to make a substitute for that product. If you come out with a wholly better product, then it's no longer a matter of substitute. It creates a whole another demand curve and it becomes a separate competition compared like say if you're making a printer that instantly prints off any piece of paper, that's no longer a competition. It's no longer a substitute with other printers. It's a new super printer, and only super printers can substitute for it.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole purpose. That's the whole one of the primary benefits that lead us to have better products is that you're constantly offering something better, something new, not just something that's on the same playing field, but just from a different producer. Like if I like with like for example cell phones. If I want a new cell phone, I'm not going to look for the cell phone that I currently have. Someone else with the same specs, same design, everything else. I want something different. I'm sure there are some cell phones out there which are like direct clones of the one I currently have. But if it's a direct clone, what incentive do I have to try this other producer? They're not offering anything, any either alternative benefit or any additional um, benefit to what I currently have.
Yeah, and that would be good in an ideal world. But like I said before, this idea of the advertising being more prominent within these tech monopolies or oligopolies is what's causing a stagnation in the progress of technology and such like that. We can see this with all these Windows softwares Microsoft is releasing. Instead of getting people to build a better base OS system, what they're doing, and I've read this specifically about Windows 8, it's just kind of a retooling of some lower Windows operating systems with new widgets added onto it, but the fundamental problems are still there and exasperated with this new code that's basically built on unsolid foundation. And Windows 7 is selling not because it's better, but well, it forces you to download everything like that, but it's selling mainly and they're advertising through their advertising, not through any kind of better upgrade.
Yeah, but there's also not a very high demand for a necessarily better upgrade. Many people who use Windows software only use it for the very, very bare minimums of general everyday computing. So, I'm sure for those select people who do want a higher operating system, they do go to alternative services like premium services like iOS or I mean Macintosh or the other open source services like Linux or Ubuntu or things like that.
That that is true, but again, those people are then informed consumers. What advertising seeks to capture is not informed consumers. People, an advertising person would not just put up the basic just stats and say, "Look, ours is better, buy it." They're going to invest in a kind of narrative push with the advertising thing, and there is a great a great great two videos made by a YouTuber called the Distributus, and he basically assessed why Sargon and the skeptical community and the very general classical liberals are eventually going to lose the cultural war against social justice warriors. And his
I think I saw a part of that with at least something along those lines, that discussion with Stardust when he had him on.
yeah, but his basic assessment was that Sargon and classical liberals they argue based on very structured arguments of premise A plus B is therefore C. And while the social justice warriors may have to give lip service and just say they agree with the premises, eventually they're not going to have to agree with the premises whatsoever, and they can just flat out reject all of his arguments. But he said the reason for this is because they're not arguing with the standard AB therefore C formula, is that they're offering a narrative, an explanation, and people are more inclined to believe narratives and such like that. And it's the same thing with advertising. If the advertising paints, oh, you're the cool person, you're the high tech person, you're the one with the latest stuff, you're the greatest, you're awesome, etc., etc., whatever warm fuzzy feelings that the advertising makes you feel or portrays, that's what the advertising is giving you, not giving you an objective readout of the comparison of their product versus the others. So then it becomes a matter of opinion, which everyone says it doesn't matter whether Windows or Mac is better, it's your opinion and such like that.
Well, yeah, but also there's also a very, again, a very low demand for people to know that type of information. I mean, most people, when they buy a new, like, let's go back to the cell phone thing, when they buy a new cell phone, a new computer, they're not interested in the deep specs of the processor and what type of plug-in capabilities it has and things like that. They just want to know things like, is it slim, does it look nice, does it take good selfies and stuff like that. And based on those consumer demands, which are, again, like you mentioned, very very basic, the advertisers advertise to those particular consumers. They know those consumers are low information, low educated consumers in terms of these products, so they appeal to that base. Whereas more specialized products appeal to the more high information, um, you know, um, more conscientious consumer. And I think that's perfectly fine. I don't think that a novice consumer should necessarily, have to know or have to be fed the same information as as an advanced consumer of similar products. I think that that should be something that between the consumer and the advertiser, they should have a mutual relationship to where they can conclude which method is most beneficial to them. I mean, if I see a phone on TV and it just says, new phone, new phone, new phone, look, new color, new screen, and things like that, buy our new phone. I'm probably not going to buy that phone because I'm more interested in a lot more in-depth specifications in terms of my mobile purchases. I'm more picky. But again, there are companies out there who appeal to consumers like me, whereas most companies appeal to consumers like I actually mentioned.
Well, then it becomes a market driving force to create these low information consumers, such as we can see. I mean, with shoes, like shoe advertisements. I mean, it's pretty much all about style, etc. I mean, I can't think of one kind of shoe commercial or shoe company that advertises any kind of objective like increases or betterments of their product versus the other. The only thing I can even think of that remotely comes close is orthopedic shoes, but those aren't even competing in the same kind of market, as one is kind of for medical purpose and the other is just purely for fashion. And this just kind of this it not only it's not just the business reacting to the already uninformed consumer base, it's the market needing to maintain this uninformed consumer base in order to keep increasing the number of product sales for their new product.
I don't think they necessarily need to maintain it. I mean, I'm pretty sure they may have some incentive to maintain it, and I'm pretty sure they probably invest in some method of maintaining it. But I think, again, most people who purchase shoes purchase so for fashion. There's very few people who purchase shoes for particular athletic purposes, for like running or things like that, or particular medical purposes, like you mentioned, orthopedic shoes. Most people just buy shoes based on, does it look nice? Does it match this top? Does it, is it red bottoms? Is it fancy? Is it Louis Vuitton? It's shoes are appealed to the very low information fashion consumer. I mean, I think that also, goes to, materials made in shoes. Most people don't know the difference between fox and sheepskin leather. They don't know they don't know the benefits of cashmere interiors, or things like that, versus regular cotton interior fabrics. They just, they say, they based on, how expensive is it, and you know do I like it? Does it feel good on my feet? Does it look nice? And can I afford it? And that's pretty much, what people go off of, and that's what consumers appeal to more often than not.
And
I mean, not consumers, but producers.
yeah, and that's all right if they were just appealing as a reaction to it. But that reaction is also a cause in itself to further further perpetuate this low information consumer. And I'm just gonna ask for one of the people I recognize in the chat. He wants me to ask you if you believe the world ought to be basically governed, or the future of it determined by people who are just mostly consumed by this consumerism.
Yeah, absolutely. I think consumers, whether they're low information or highly educated, they, whether you're low information, consumer or not, you as a consumer know what is best for you, um, to attain, in terms of whatever products you purchase, things like that.
Oh well,
So,
I
whether
don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. Many people will buy things against their own interest, and even a I would say he's bordering on nationalist, but an anarcho-capitalist like Hoppe even acknowledges the idea of time preference within Democracy of God that failed. He talks about the idea of people not investing in the long term and not doing what's best for them based on this idea of time preference. And long term is a general thing. People with really short time preferences, it could be not investing for the next month or the next week, etc., etc., etc. But the basic idea that people are even well informed enough to know what is, as they say, good for good for them in terms of economic purchases and sound economic investment is just thrown out the window with the very low information consumer. And also, I'm not saying like low information in terms of education. You can be not educated but still be high information by simply looking into the research behind the product and such like that. And that
Mhm.
requires just kind of a natural drive within the person to be more both I to use a stupid progressive term, socially conscious in terms of what the companies are doing, what they're promoting, what they're backing, and along with being economically conscious of the investment, the decision making.
Possibly, and I get your argument. So I would possibly rephrase that in that I don't necessarily believe um that society should overtly be ran by low information consumers, but I think consumers should have the freedom to pursue whatever products best suit their real time interests. I don't think consumer demand should be kind of arbitrarily dictated by any type of central authority.
And I don't think you really can change demand outside of advertising, and I personally am a nationalist libertarian. Probably has nothing to do with the libertarianism you spout, but that's one of the differences between me and the other national socialists is I disagree with the idea of government doing kind of basic ad campaigns or whatever to try to sway public opinion. I just don't even if it's a good intention propaganda, I don't agree with the idea of propaganda, and I don't really think that the government can influence the population's demand directly except through a government advertising propaganda. Now, what I think they could do is, create, as I said, a protectionism and control the supply within the economy, and that can indirectly influence demand.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm referring to primarily, because I know in your regard, you're making the argument to make it to where it's an equal playing field on on imports and export and domesticated produced products. But and actually that's pretty interesting because it's the first time I actually heard that argument. Primarily, when I hear protectionist, they want to make it to where um, domestically produced products have the advantage of having it cheaper. To where you're not just making it. Like for example, with Donald Trump, he's not just interested in making if Ford decides to produce its trucks in Mexico, he's not interested in just making it equal to, Chevy trucks, which are produced in America. He's also interested in making Chevy trucks preferable by, increasing the tariff to where the point to where Ford would actually lose sales because their products would, arbitrarily be more expensive than domesticated Chevy.
Of of course, and that's getting into an idea of kind of a punishment things, and he said specifically with Ford. I can't remember if it was Ford or if he was. I think he used the same number for both the air conditioning units and the trucks, but he said a 35% tax, and that's getting more into the idea of having a punishment tax for leaving. And I would debate the need for having an extra tax applied if they were leaving the United States as a punishment tax, because if another company is just outside the country and was formed over there and everything, there's no real need to punish them or disincentivize them for leaving the country. But on the other hand, with Trump's idea of having kind of a punishment tax, that it's even more costly to those who decide to leave the country instead. And I don't know if I'm exactly for that. It would be open up to a debate with me.
Hmm. Okay, but you would favor
A
a
tariff
system
making it the
that would
prices
that
equal.
would allow it to be possible
A system to allow it to um
to where that could be a debatable possibility.
um
Not necessarily that you're for it, but just the system would have that power to actually enact that if they chose to.
yes, I think so. I would be for a system that would as you described, have the power to increase the tariff to that level if need be as a form of punishment tax.
Hmm. So, so what benefit do you think that you would receive as a consumer from a product, being an imported product versus a domesticated product being taxed to where they're now equal? Right.
Well, for the
Where would you
consumer,
put
it would
that?
just be the same price. A Chinese made tire versus an American made tire, both are equal to, let's say $40.00 for both. So if the Chinese import, maybe they sell it to it has you have to go into multiple calculations for the store overheads, the general stock and distributor overheads and everything like that. But I think just the basic end thing of when the consumer looks at the prices of both the foreign import and the domestic product, if they're both the same, that would be an appropriate amount of tax.
But how did that benefit the consumer?
Oh, that it benefits the consumer indirectly because it becomes a matter of tastes and preferences whether if he really has the preference to buy a Chinese made tire, he still has the ability to do that for no less than if he bought the American made tire. But if he chooses to buy the American made tire, not only does it satisfy his preferences, but also it indirectly helps him in a small way by putting money back into the domestic economy, which a kind of a I not that I've noticed, but that's just kind of fundamental to most economies, especially ones based on capitalism, is that they kind of function as just like as a wheel that just kind of grows as Friedman would say the pie is not fixed. As this pie basically grows, they basically benefit from that increased pie and their share of said increasing pie, and by investing within that domestic economy or that particular pie, they're indirectly helping themselves compared to if they invested in that foreign made product. They're also increasing a pie, but they're increasing a much larger pie that's split against much more of the world who are also not contributing into increasing the size of that pie, thereby making their investment and their indirect gains from that investment smaller.
What would like if one of the benefits for the consumer was cheaper product, if now you're making it to where all products are on a level playing field to where they all cost the same, what incentive does either company have to invest in a cheaper product for the consumer?
Um, they have a incentive to invest in a cheaper product because of course laws aren't they're very reactive and they're also very slow. One of the big problems with that we both agree with socialist policies is the idea. Crap. I think you even mentioned in your debate with Sargon just the idea that it's impossible for a state to litigate how much people should use, consume, etc., etc.
Hmm.
And so the laws are very reactive and slow to do this. So that foreign company or the domestic company, whichever, if they can do something to say reduce their marginal cost in producing the extra unit of output, if they can reduce their marginal cost, then they'll have a lower price compared to that other thing for a limited amount of time. And depending, I can't really like in practice it would be very variable to predict this, but with basic ideas of running on platforms and the responsiveness of government, even if it's a very not ideal, but as close to ideal government as we can get, I can't imagine more than every I was gonna say like 6 months to reform the tax code, but in a even in a very good government, there's still going to be polarization and a difference of ideas to reforming a tax code. So even then, I mean, it could maybe even take up to like 9 months to a year to even change the tax code. I mean, if it alters significantly, I think the more that the price would change, the more quickly the tax code would reform to compensate for that, especially if it was the foreign company dropping it to like some retarded amount of money, like Chinese tires only $3 for four. I mean, then I think it would reform within like maybe a month or two. But the $40 tire, Chinese tire versus domestic, if it dropped to like $35, I would say it would be pretty safe to assume that the tax code would be able to reform to the point where it was back to $40 within about 9 months to a year.
Okay. So here's where I see that being exploitatable by domestic companies. If you set the precedent to where um, foreign imports now have to are now forced to or their prices are forced to be equal to that of their domestic competitors. Domestic companies now have an advantage to where they can increase their own prices. For example, with the tire situation, if it was all $40 a tire, and domestic companies now have the chance to where they can arbitrarily increase their price to $80 a tire, and you know the foreign competitor doesn't really have a choice because they can't really you know compete properly because now they also have the tax code will also force their tire arbitrarily to rise to $80.
Yes, that is
So I see
entirely
that
true,
being
but I would say a counteractory force to that would also be other domestic companies too. They're also competing for the same sales and driving down the price as well.
okay. So it'll kind of be like limiting competition, basically making it to where really only domestic companies can compete.
Um, yeah, domestic companies would compete would be the primary competitors, but at the same time, foreign imports would also inevitably just have some percentage of the market share as well. As long as you have stock on the shelf, unless you're a pariah, usually as the supply of that particular store runs out, people will go for off brands and things like that, and just a basic principle of microeconomics of substitutes and and elasticity among pr- price elasticity. That's it.
Well, considering that supply does decrease.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just a given of reality. I'm talking about supply in terms of just like a Target store. So those tires, as the other tires get more bought out, the supply of the Chinese tires increases just within that particular store and within that limited period of time until restocking.
Well, possibly, but if all the domestic tires are being bought out, that does also allow for increased revenue of the current of the domestic company to increase investment in kind of more rapid reproduction of product, more increased inventory to um, to possibly buy more shelf space or more storage space in a particular retail store that the foreign competitor can no longer afford to do because they can't properly compete because they can't really get their sales out because the domestic competitor is essentially has a monopoly on sales.
Um, Not a monopoly, but a an oligopoly, and and that is true, and the whole point is to prefer domestic economies and domestic firms over international economies, and it's often and it's intended to be the case with international companies. Is the reason that they're exporting is that it not right to say that they've completely exhausted their domestic economy, but that it is also profitable to send it to that international economic, you know, to internationally export. But they still have their own domestic economies to buy and purchase those tires. So, yes, in a way, a protectionist economy would encourage other nations to also adopt protectionist economies as well.
Hmm. Huh. Interesting. Uh, it's that, I want to think about it because it sounds just on off rip. It sounds scary as hell. But it is an interesting theory.
Hmm.
I'm definitely gonna have to look into that a little bit more. I actually have to get going though.
Of course, and also again, I want to recommend that book, Debunking Economics.
Yeah, I think
It's a
I
great book. I mean, I used
yeah
to
definitely
be
came across
classical liberal like Sargon, and I used to think, why are people Marxist? Why are people socialist? I mean, this is economics. We have the numbers here to back it up. But that book is pretty good at exactly that, debunking neoliberal economics. And it analyzes various points like Marxist economics briefly and Keynesian economics and such like that. And and I
it.
just want to emphasize, it's not a debunking of capitalism as a practice. I would say it's more a debunking of neoclassical analytics and prediction, ability to predict of capitalistic scenarios.
So is it kind of more so a spin off of the Chicago school, kind of?
I can't remember what he is, but I think a few times he praised Kinay's work in, or Kinay, I don't know how to say his name, Kinay's
King.
keys. Yeah.
Yeah.
He praises his work in economics a few times, but it's mostly a debunking of the neoliberal economic analytics, and I highly recommend it. Is there anything else you want to touch on before you go?
Um, Not well. There's one more question. Given the model that you propose, your preferred model, do you think that Donald Trump is someone who could enact that possibly, or not could, but do you think that he would be in favor of enacting something like that, or you think he's kind of like the wrong type of protectionism?
No, I definitely like Trump's policy. I don't think he is as specific about it enough, because I think with most protectionism, I don't think they um, they they enumerate it specifically to, we want exactly this amount, this kind of level with any of the taxes thing. I think they're, since it's not really in the well, it hasn't been in the political discourse for a while until this Republican primary. It has been mostly, we need to enact protectionist policies to protect, but I don't think the details of said policy have been done. And the person in my chat has brought up another point that I like to say against classical economics and anarcho-capitalist is the idea that you don't like income tax. Now I've written down and wrote that it's a necessary evil, but I think that you could possibly eliminate income tax if, and I also believe in budgetary government, etc., such as, at the beginning of the term, government sets a budget for, this is the exact amount of money we want to spend, and after that, dictating how much they should tax. And if they get all of that budget covered by the tariffs, money made by tariffs, essentially you could have a situation where you would have no income tax, and I think that would be absolutely wonderful. So that was a point that
Well, that goes
person
into
in my chat
assumption
made.
that government would be satisfied with whatever tax they receive from the tariffs.
Well, yeah, that would be just basic, just a problem with political discourse of setting the budget and everything like that. And I have written a very detailed plan, and I don't know if it would work exactly, but it basically just comes down to the political process of, you can't enforce a tax without creating a budget, and thus it becomes a an issue of the government saying, all right, we need to have a budget to actually do anything, so we need to make an agreement politically on how much this budget should cost, and if it's too high, then of course people will say, if you make this budget, you're gonna, income tax us by 90%. Screw you, we're not gonna elect you, etc. and such like that. So that would encourage the lowest possible budget.
Hmm. Huh,
But
possibly.
but I mean, in a system that I think is practical with the tariffs, and I'm just ballparking this. If if this whole plan, and I was somehow right, were to be enacted, I would be decently happy if the government passed a budget that's about maybe half of what it's currently doing and getting most of it through tariffs and maybe having like a 6 through 9% income tax on the rest of the country. And what do you think about that? I don't really like the idea of income tax brackets. I mean, Trump's tax bracket plan is better than what we have now, but I do think that flat taxes are a bit better than that. Would you agree?
I would agree they're better than like different
A bracket
classes in
system?
terms of yeah. But then again, it's better, but it's still fucking cancer because I'm still Austrian. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, yeah. Trump's he just wants them to be lower. But I think that's a it's always a temporary thing. I don't think that's ever a long lasting um proposition, especially if you have capability to change up different tax brackets and different percentages that people are obligated to pay. I think that the natural state of or natural consequence of government is to always try and exploit the most possible resources from whatever particular class group.
But
So
remember,
I think that's why.
even Hoppe disagreed with that when he talked about his assessment of privately owned government in the case of monarchies and why it's more efficient and better than public owned governments because he basically created a basic model where the private government would want to increase their profit in the long term as much as possible due to having a higher time preference through genetic hierarchy and thus not overtax the people so the people can be even more productive, and then it's just a basic function of getting the most taxes out of people while the people still being as productive as possible to increase the economy in the future. Have you read that
Hmm.
book, Democracy: The God That Failed?
Did I read that one? I think I might. I'm sure I didn't finish it if I did read some of it, but I have to go back and check. I have
Yeah, he's one
one
of the good anarcho-capitalists. You should definitely read it. I like Hoppe a
why
lot.
because physical
I don't
because of
agree with
physical removal.
yeah, I don't agree with his end assessment, but I do like his logical arguments coming to that assessment, and also some of the premises he puts forward, and also ironically the very little quote where he rejects the idea of protectionism is also a great argument for kind of economic segregation of you may remember the quote of him saying, "It's this very freedom that allows us to trade or not trade with Catholics, Hispanics, Japanese, etc., etc., that allows our free market to work in the first place." Basically,
Hmm.
him advocating for kind of collectivize discrimination economically.
Yeah, which he is correct in that regard.
Hmm.
Hmm.
All right, so
So yeah,
you had to go.
I'll
And,
definitely have to check out this debunking economics. But yeah, man, it was a good discussion, dude.
Yep,
Thanks for having me on.
and I'm also gonna upload to my channel that video I mentioned earlier of that guy talking about why I think the company is IBM, why IBM isn't innovating and instead it's stagnating.
Uh, okay. All right, I'll definitely on the lookout for that.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll see you later, man.
All right, thanks for having me on, dude.
Yep. I'll see you. And thanks for joining us, chat. And thanks for watching again, chat, and hopefully I can stream more debates with more people. My next debate is going to be with V at the end of November after his exam. So we're probably looking at maybe November, like either in the late 20s or maybe November 30th, around that time. We need to set a specific date, but he has promised me we're going to debate at that time. So I'll see you all later.